For my C1 submission, I will be dictating my PowerPoint so that I can communicate my ideas more clearly, starting with divisive debates. This is my initial page inspiration, exploring a variety of artists and images that inspired me throughout the Page a Day project. Initially, we worked in a group looking at the Croydon cat killer case. Initially, I wanted to create a comic, but due to time, was unable to format this initial image into a comic layout. I also felt like I couldn't really relate or connect to the story, as well as not really understanding the full case, which meant that it was hard for me to communicate my ideas clearly without being too one-sided to the situation. So we realised that the group project didn't really suit all of us, which made us go into our own individual projects. I reflected back to my Page a Day and looked into doing something about the wave of waste that I collected in Cornwall. I developed some quick thumbnails of ideas where I could incorporate text and imagery, maybe illustration as well, very digital based. My initial inspiration came from these laminated collage collection that I had made whilst down there. I had envisaged this piece being presented as a poster, both available for landscape and portrait, so that it could be used both at a bus stop or a tube station, or even inside a train or bus. On the side of this, I also collected a SurveyMonkey survey, where I asked a variety of people how much plastics that they use a day, and is there any way that people have tried to reduce that. You can see the survey is available on my WordPress blog. These were my initial two outcomes from my thumbnails that I developed further. I did want it to be more illustration based, however from feedback I found out that the photo montage was actually more successful than the illustration. It communicated the idea better and showed more of a location, a direct location of the target audience that I'm sort of aiming to communicate to. This was my overall outcome, quite a simple, striking design. I didn't want it to be too overcomplicated. I just wanted it to be eye-catching enough so that it intrigued people into the situation and the context of the image, and then hope there is like a web link at the bottom of it where I wanted to create a web or a blog that then gives more information of how people can get involved, find out other alternatives to using plastic straws. Overall, I am happy with my final outcome and look forward to developing this more in the future into a zine. For our next project, we did documentary. For my initial ideas, I looked at some of my favourite personal documentaries and explored what made them good, their layout, format, the way that they were filmed or illustrated, and how they communicated to a certain audience. I wanted to go into a self-defined project and look at my personal environment. I have grown up in a very ballet, theatre orientated environment my whole life, and that has had a huge impact on my artwork to this very day. Being the daughter of two performers, I am lucky to have this archived footage showing my parents' performances and rehearsals and behind the stage features. I wanted to contrast these VHS videos that I have found with a modern public life. I wanted to present these videos as a montage in a similar style to Joanne Jones' videos of her performances. Initial key videos that I found from the archives that I thought really communicated to me to help create a little narrative through this sort of montage of videos. I experimented trying to create my own music to go on in the background of the old VHS videos. However, I struggled to do so, and in the end decided just to use a piece of music that I had taken from the one of the archived videos that I thought fitted perfectly because it was very noisy, distorted, loud, hard to make out, and really contrasted against the silence, the comfortable silence of the modern films that I'd collected. At the bottom here you can also see that I had started to plan out a storyboard so that I could create a little narrative throughout the video so that it wasn't just a spontaneous montage. I wanted to represent a journey of the environments of which I am surrounded in, both my home and the studio of which all the dancers rehearsing, and is actually the same studio that features in the old VHS videos, and I hopefully have communicated that clearly. When I was getting feedback from my initial video, I asked people if they could see that connection, and people did understand that it was the same environment, so I'm pleased that I communicated that well, and people could see that clearly amongst the busyness. Overall, I'm quite happy with my final outcome, although I would have liked, if I had had more time, to add some animation or some speech within the video to add even more sort of disorientation, or maybe like definitions of dancers or the voices of what my parents were thinking through the public life as well as the private life. I also think that this video has twisted the idea of what is public and what is private. Do people see the private as the old videos of them rehearsing in their own space? Or is the private life the journey from my house to the studio? Is that the private time? So I think it can be interpreted in a number of different ways. So I see this film being projected onto a large wall space surrounded by the illustrations I made and observations I made from the archive videos, as well as the linking sketchbooks with research. I really want people to feel involved with the space and very sort of brought into the film itself. The fact that the video itself doesn't have any animation or illustrations that feature inside it made me feel very uncomfortable. This is not what I am used to producing, so I think it's quite successful that I managed to get over that and explore something that is quite new to me, but it's something I would definitely like to revisit and develop more in the future. External brief. For my external brief, I chose to look at art for St. Mark's. The initial brief for this was biophilia. Biophilia means reconnection with nature, love of nature, the urge to be connected with other forms of life. This is my initial page of ideas on how to present biophilia, with a range of materials that even include real flowers, leaves, twigs, earth that is laminated, that I was inspired by from my previous projects. My second idea was to do a more figurative piece of our direct connection and explored colour psychology to help me indicate certain feelings and emotions, could communicate healthy emotions, atmosphere and feeling towards my artwork. These were my initial images and collection of nature that I went out and collected from the grounds of the hospital, of which this work will hopefully be presented at. This was my first experiment mixing a range of materials and mediums together, relating back to my plastics work when I laminated pieces of flowers, in the sense that I was bringing real nature inside to the hospital to create a more direct sensory experience for the patients to feel when they look at the art. Final outcome and feedback was that personally I don't think the outcome was as successful as I had hoped for, as these final outcomes weren't as successful as I'd hoped for, and the feedback that I got back from my viewers was that it looks like I am encasing dead nature that is sort of trapped in this unhealthy plastic. It looks like the plants can't really breathe, rather than bringing live, healthy environment inside the building. I've sort of encased it and preserved it, which was not the sort of impact I wanted to give. So I decided to go to the Natural History Museum, to the Darwin Centre, so that I could surround myself with research to inspire me to develop this idea further. I also discovered a artist, Christopher Marley, who has a book on biophilia. Within this, he photographed insects, creatures, and photoshopped them into aesthetically pleasing patterns and shapes. This really inspired me and gave me an idea of where I want this project to go and how I want to present it. I made some digital observations whilst at the Darwin Centre of plants, butterflies and insects. I want to develop these on Photoshop so that I can create a similar layout to Christopher Marley's, but using illustrations instead. Illustrating the plants and insects is better than photographing them, because a photograph makes them look more dead and more realistic, whereas an illustration keeps the fantasy idea of them being alive and the idea that they can never die. I used Photoshop so that I could create a perfect symmetrical image for just the butterflies, whereas the plants were more flowing and free. I'm really pleased with my final outcomes for this project. It's very different to what I usually do and was great fun to produce. I've tried to create 3 separate hues to create different atmospheres. I'd like them to be presented as a 3 in this format, hopefully either A3 or A2. If I had more time, I would have perhaps liked to experiment trying to replicate these images into wallpaper designs, so making these designs even smaller and repeating them even more over a space of A2 or A3. I think the white emphasises them and makes them come out more. When illustrating these observations, I did them in the style of Benday dot, which is used to create pop art images. I use this so that the circles that it's created from creates more of a calming, symmetrical effect to the overall outcome. What's also interesting is the amount of detail, the pattern that they create far away, as well as the intricate design that you see closer. As a result of these outcomes, I will be submitting a proposal showing these ideas to St. Mark's, and hopefully we'll hear back from them. If not, I definitely do want to apply this as that wallpaper style, and perhaps see if I can develop anything more for this project.